He's a world-renowned plastic and reconstructive British-Palestinian surgeon, and until a few weeks ago, he was working in Gaza's Al Ahli hospital. Ghassan Abu-Sittah is our guest today on France 24. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to speak to us. Doctor, we've heard so much about hospitals reaching breaking point, but tell us what it was like in the last few days for you in Al Ahli. What were the conditions like, and what was it that at the end made you say, now is the time to leave?
So once Chifa was completely surrounded by Israeli forces and patients could no longer get to it, Al Ahli Hospital became the only hospital in Gaza City. And Al Ahli, if you remember, had been destroyed, and so we only had two functioning operating rooms and only the ground floor wards. And so suddenly, within days, we had over 500 wounded, and just initially 2 surgeons and then only 3 surgeons. And we were running out of medication. Initially, we ran out of morphine. And so after surgeries, we were unable to give our patients anything more than just paracetamol and a non-steroidal medication. And then we started running out of ketamine. And ketamine is one of those ancient war surgery anesthetics that we used to use to enable us, at least if we couldn't treat the wounds, to keep them clean by scrubbing them. And in the last few days, I was having to, because I was so worried about these patients whose wounds were getting infected and their dressings became stained with pus, and they were developing fevers, to clean their wounds, which is an extremely painful process, without any anesthetic. I would have to scrub these wounds while the patient was fully awake, because unless I did that, they would become infected. And the devastating thing is we had to do that a few times with children, because their temperatures getting higher, and children very quickly are overwhelmed by infection. And then after a missile attack on a mosque where we received 60 dead and hundreds wounded, we had been operating on all day. And at 5 o'clock that morning, we ran out of medication for the anesthetic department, where there was no more propofol or anesthetic gas. And we had to stop. The operating rooms at Al Ahli had to stop. And Al Ahli from that point just became a first aid station. And it was at that point that I realized I needed to find another hospital to be able to function. When I got to the south, although the hospitals had not been physically damaged, their capacity to take patients to the operating room was not that much better. They were so short of medication, and they were so short of anesthetic medication that only the most critically wounded were able to go to the operating rooms. And so the last 2 days in Gaza, I was just doing dressing changes and no more. I couldn't take my patients to the operating room for any surgery to their wounds. Which leaves us with the fact that 50%, of the 50,000 wounded in Gaza, probably 70 to 80% still need surgery, and some of them need multiple surgeries. The system at the moment is unable to fully treat these patients because the capacity is just not there.
Now, doctor, tell me something. We've seen that a lot of the very large proportion of these dead and wounded are women and children. First of all, is that something that you is that correct? And if so, why? How is it that it's such a large proportion of victims?
Well, during my day, I would operate on between 10 and 12 patients. I would do surgeries on them, and 50% were children. And the reason is that what is being targeted are residential homes. And as families seek refuge from one area to another and stay with relatives, you're getting a situation where whole families are being wiped out. Multiple generations, grandparents, parents, uncles and aunts, and grandchildren. And so, we were having kids that were taken out from underneath the rubble wounded, who were the sole survivors of their families on multiple generations. When Chifa fell, there were 120 of these kids, wounded child with no surviving family. And at Al Ahli, we had 4 kids in a matter of days that we were operating on. I did an amputation on a 3-year-old boy with in his upper limb and lower limb. And we didn't even know his name because he was 3 years old and we couldn't get him to say his name. And he was the only survivor that had been taken out from underneath the rubble.
So now we're in a situation where we've got crowding in unsanitary conditions in pockets of the Gaza Strip. Can you tell us about the conditions there for them? We're hearing about unsanitary, access to toilets and sleeping outside.
So we now have the perfect storm for epidemics in the southern part of Gaza. You have overcrowding in schools, which have become refugee centers. These schools, of course, don't have sufficient toilets or shower facilities. You have a population that's now malnourished, which decreases people's immunity. The 50,000 are wounded, which also decreases people's immunity. And so you're getting a situation where you have hepatitis A, you're getting diarrheal diseases, you're getting respiratory diseases. And it's only a matter of time when you start getting cholera and typhus and more lethal epidemics breaking out because the population is immunosuppressed as a result of its injury and its infection and its malnutrition. And they're in conditions that are ripe for infection. Add to that, now that we've entered winter, people don't understand that a malnourished child with a wound will die of hypothermia, low temperature, at much higher temperatures than we think. We think that people die of hypothermia when the temperature is 0 degrees or less. If you have lost body weight as a child and you have large wounds, you've lost the ability to produce heat to prevent hypothermia. And so we will be getting kids dying of hypothermia in Gaza at around 10 degrees centigrade or thereabouts. The whole situation is a catastrophe waiting to happen. The wounded are going to die of their wounds, and the survivors are going to be dying of exposure to the elements and of pandemics and epidemics.
Ghassan Abu-Sittah, thank you so much for joining us. That's catastrophe upon catastrophe. Thank you again for joining us from the UK where you are now.